The first time the sheriff's deputy showed up, I was patching a hole in my chicken coop. A coyote had gotten ambitious the night before, and I was nailing a piece of scrap metal over the breach when the dust from a county cruiser billowed up my long dirt driveway. I'm not gonna lie, my heart did a little flip. When you live the way I do, off-grid, self-sufficient and a little bit feral, an official car usually means trouble. But it wasn't trouble for me. Not that first time. "Morning, ma'am," the deputy said, tipping his hat. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that hadn't seen enough yet. "We got a complaint from the HOA over at Cielo Vista Estates. Someone reported an unlicensed construction vehicle on the property." I looked at him. Then I looked behind me at my beat-up 1978 Ford pickup, which hadn't moved under its own power in 3 years. It was full of firewood. I looked back at him. "Sir," I said slowly, "that vehicle hasn't moved since Obama was in office. And I'm pretty sure the HOA doesn't have jurisdiction 8 miles outside their gated entrance." He had the decency to look embarrassed. He apologized, said he had to follow up on complaints and drove away. That was 7 months ago. Since then, I've had 18 visits from various law enforcement agencies. Sheriff's deputies, county code enforcement, even a state trooper once. The complaints are always creative. Unlicensed structures, my barn; excessive dust, it's a dirt road; burning without a permit, my campfire; harboring dangerous wildlife, my goats. And the source is always the same: the board of the Cielo Vista Estates Homeowners Association. They want my land. And I mean, they really want it. To understand why, you have to go back 7 years. My great-aunt Martha died at the age of 94. She was the last of a dying breed, a real New Mexico homesteader. She lived in a tin-roofed shack without electricity or running water until the day she passed, sitting on a piece of property that her father had claimed under an 1862 homestead patent. When the will was read, I inherited 640 acres, 1 square mile. It was high desert, pinyon and juniper country, with a spring-fed creek that ran through the middle of it. To me, it was heaven. To the developers who had been circling her like vultures for the last decade of her life, it was the last piece of a puzzle. You see, my land doesn't just sit anywhere. It sits at the top of a valley. Below it, spreading out like a concrete fungus, is Cielo Vista Estates, a luxury gated community of million-dollar homes, golf courses, and people who pay other people to think about dirt. My great-aunt had refused to sell to them for 30 years. She called them suit people, and chased their surveyors off with a shotgun. When I inherited it, the HOA initially tried the friendly approach. They invited me to meetings. They offered to help me modernize. They suggested I might want to sell and cash out while the market was hot. I told them politely that I was happy with my 1 square mile of dirt in my great-aunt's shack. That's when things got weird. 6 months after I moved in full-time, I got a certified letter from the county. It informed me that my property had been rezoned from rural agricultural to residential estates, and that my existing structures were now in violation of minimum habitability standards. I was given 90 days to bring the property up to code or face fines. I drove to the county planning department. A very nice woman named Dolores pulled the file. "Who requested this rezone?" I asked. She hesitated. "It was a petition from the adjacent property owners, the Cielo Vista Estates HOA. They filed it as a community benefit request, arguing that your property's current use depresses their property values and poses a fire risk. And the county just approved it?" She lowered her voice. "Their lawyer is tight with the county commissioners. And they donated heavily to the last election cycle. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do." I went home and looked at my land with new eyes. The golf course ended at my property line. The hiking trails in the state park stopped at my fence. The only thing between Cielo Vista Estates and $1 million view of the entire valley was me and my goats. And then, like a bolt of lightning, I understood. They didn't just want my land. They needed it. Without it, their luxury view lots at the back of the subdivision were just expensive houses looking at a hill. With my land, they could build 20 more estates, extend the golf course, and probably add a second clubhouse. My little slice of heaven was worth $10 million, but only if it was covered in stucco and Spanish tile. The visit started a few weeks after the rezone. First, it was code enforcement about my unpermitted structure, the 100-year-old homestead shack. I showed them the historical exemption for pre-1970 structures. They went away. Then it was the fire marshal about my illegal burning. I showed him my campfire ring, which was 50 feet from any vegetation and lined with stone. He went away. Then it was the health department about my lack of sanitation facilities. I showed them my composting toilet, which was fully compliant with state guidelines for off-grid living. They went away, but not happily. Each time the complaint came from the same source. The HOA had set up a system. They had a hotline. They had a lawyer. They had a list of every conceivable violation they could allege, and they were working through it methodically. The low point came in February. A deputy showed up at my gate at 6 in the morning. He wasn't alone. There was a truck from animal control behind him. "We have a report of livestock neglect," the deputy said. His face was grim. "We need to inspect your animals." I led them to the barn. My goats, 6 of them, were fat and happy munching on hay. My chickens were scratching in the dirt. My 2 horses, old and retired, were dozing in the sun. Animal control took one look, shook their head at the deputy and left. The deputy lingered. He was an older man, maybe 50, with a weathered face and tired eyes. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I've been doing this job for 25 years. I know a harassment campaign when I see one. But my hands are tied. As long as they keep calling, I have to keep coming." "How many times?" I asked. "Before it stops?" "Never. Or when they get what they want." He got back in his car. "I'm sorry." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars wheel overhead. The lights of Cielo Vista Estates glittered below me, a carpet of electric arrogance. They had money. They had lawyers. They had the county commission in their pocket. But I had something they didn't. I had history. The next morning I drove to the county clerk's office. I spent 3 days in the archives, pulling dusty deed books and plat maps. I traced my property back to 1862, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Homestead Act. I found my great-great-grandfather's original patent, signed by Ulysses S. Grant. I found every subsequent deed, every transfer, every boundary marker. And then I found the gold mine. In 1912, when New Mexico became a state, the federal government granted certain right-of-way easements to the new state government for the purpose of building roads and utilities. Most of those easements had been abandoned decades ago. But one of them, a narrow strip along the western edge of my property, had never been formally vacated. That strip was the only access point to a spring that had once watered cattle for 3 counties. The spring had dried up in the 1950s, but the easement still existed on paper. And according to state law, if an easement hasn't been used for its original purpose for 50 years, it reverts to the landowner. Unless, of course, someone had been using it. I pulled the recent survey maps for Cielo Vista Estates. Their luxury homes stopped exactly 200 feet short of my western boundary. What? Because that strip of land, my land, was the only place they could run the sewer line for any new development. Without it they couldn't build. But here's the thing. In their rush to harass me into selling, they had made a mistake. The previous year, during the construction of their newest model home, they had run a temporary utility line across that easement. They had done it without permission, without an environmental review, and, most importantly, without renewing the easement. They had trespassed. And in New Mexico, trespassing on a federal-era right-of-way carries some very specific penalties. I didn't confront them. I didn't call my lawyer. I waited. I waited through 3 more visits from code enforcement. I waited through a ridiculous complaint about my excessive firewood storage being a fire hazard. I waited through a visit from the IRS, who had received an anonymous tip that I was running an unlicensed business. I wasn't. Each time I smiled, showed them my paperwork, and watched them leave. And then, when the harassment reached a fever pitch, when I had 2 deputies and a state trooper at my gate simultaneously, I made my move. I filed a lawsuit in federal court. Not against the county. Not against the individual officers. Against the Cielo Vista Estates Homeowners Association, its board of directors, and the development company that owned the land next to mine. My cause of action? Trespass. Conversion. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Civil conspiracy. And this was the killer violation of the 1872 mining law, which had been amended to include protections for homestead patents. The easement they had used? It wasn't just any easement. It was part of the original federal land grant. By using it without authorization, they had triggered a federal review process. And in that process, I had the right to demand that they either purchase the easement at fair market value or remove their utilities and restore the land. Fair market value for a utility easement on a $10 million piece of property? About $2.5 million. They didn't want to go to trial. Their lawyers called my lawyers within a week. The negotiations were brutal. They threatened. They blustered. They tried to drag in the county, the state, anyone who might have influence. But I had them. The federal jurisdiction meant their local connections were useless. The judge was a Reagan appointee who had no patience for HOAs who thought they were above the law. In the end we settled. The terms were simple. The HOA would pay me $1.8 million for a permanent, defined utility easement along the western boundary. They would drop all pending complaints against me. They would pay my legal fees. And they would issue a public statement acknowledging my right to live on my land as I saw fit, without harassment. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the clause I insisted on adding at the last minute. Any future development on their land that required access to my property, including viewshed protections, noise ordinances, or aesthetic complaints, would require my written consent. If they wanted to build those 20 luxury homes, they would have to come to me hat in hand and ask permission. And I would say no. That was 2 years ago. The harassment stopped immediately. The deputies don't come anymore. The code enforcement officers found other hobbies. The HOA board, humiliated and broke, was voted out in the next election. The new board sent me a polite letter asking if I'd like to be an honorary member. I framed it and hung it in my outhouse. The land is still mine. All 640 acres of it. I fixed up my great-aunt's shack, added solar panels, a proper well, and a satellite internet connection so I could watch the HOA's monthly meetings online. They spend a lot of time arguing about paint colors and lawn heights. I spend my time hiking, tending my goats, and watching the sunset from my porch. Sometimes, on clear days, I can see the surveyors from the development company. They stand at the edge of their property, looking at my land with hungry eyes. They have plans, I'm sure. Blueprints. Spreadsheets. They want to build. They want to cash in. But they can't. Not without me. And me? I'm not going anywhere. This land has been in my family for 160 years. It survived droughts, depressions, and the best efforts of a bunch of suit people with more money than sense. It'll survive me too. But before it does, I'm going to enjoy every single minute of watching them want what they can't have. Every deputy who drives away empty-handed. Every complaint that dies on someone's desk. Every sunset that paints my valley in gold and purple while their golf courses go dark. They wanted my land. They sent their cops. They tried every trick in the book. Too bad for them. I was here first. And I'm still here. The moral of the story? Sometimes the best way to fight City Hall is to outweight them. And if you have 100 years of history on your side, you'll win every time.